Good morning. How are we this morning? Everyone all right? Excuse me. Well, we should be all right because it is a glorious day, isn't it? I've been waiting for this. Everyone kept saying to me since I've been here, oh, it's going to get better, Bryan, it's going to get better. And now it finally is. So I'm very happy about that. Anyway, if you have a Bible with you, we are in Philippians chapter 4, so whether you have a hard copy or on your device, that is where we are going to be this morning. What got you here this morning? I don't mean whether you came by car or bike or foot or however means of transportation, but what fueled you to get here this morning? Maybe some of you like a good breakfast, right? You tucked into some nice bacon and eggs and stuff. Perhaps some of you had some cereal. Maybe some of you just going on coffee or tea. That would be me this morning. But something fueled us to get here this morning. But at some point that will run out, right? I can already feel the caffeine starting to decline a little bit, but that's okay. And what do you do when the fuel runs out? And what should you be fueling up on? Because that also seems to be kind of a constant debate. Because if you are going to get to where you want to go, right, you're going to need some fuel to get you there. In this series, which we've called Transformational, we've been kind of using the analogy of running. And as we're in the penultimate sermon on the series, why stop using that analogy now, right? And I was thinking about this, and I ran my first Portland Marathon back in, I don't know if I should mention when that was, 1989 that was. And I really knew absolutely zero about long distance running, frankly. And except the only thing I knew, excuse me, I need to take a drink. The only thing I knew, was that you needed carbohydrates to get to the end of the race. And so me and my mate, we decided that we would go out and eat at this Italian restaurant called Sylvia's, which used to be on Northeast Sandy. And we went out the night before, and we stuffed our faces with spaghetti and garlic bread. So much so that when I waddled out of the restaurant, I was really not sure if I was going to be able to run the next day or not. But some of it wore off, and we got to the start line, and it was a beautiful October morning in Portland, and cool, but it was nice and sunny, and so this is going to be great, and took off running, and of course all those carbs in there were just raring to go, right? And so off I went, and halfway through the race, I looked at my watch and went, oh, this is going to be a great time. Kept going, over St. John's Bridge, into North Portland, about 20 miles, and suddenly, cramps. And I never had cramps so bad in my life. All the back of my leg, everything just ground to a complete stop. And I'd noticed along the way that there were some tables, with cups of water and that, and some snacks, but I kind of ignored it because I thought, well, I don't really need that, I did all this carb loading the night before. Why would I need that to get me there? Well, of course, I've learned a lot since then, and I know that just eating a big meal the night before a race is not going to get you there. Now, we're not talking about physical food here this morning, but we're talking about spiritual food, right? And maybe you're coming here this morning and it's been a long week, and it feels like you've kind of just run a marathon this week, and you're kind of depleted, and you're down, and you just need to do some spiritual carb loading, if you like. And maybe that's what you feel like you will do here this morning. Just load up, right, on Sunday morning and go out again, and you're going to make it through the following week. Or maybe not, because maybe Sunday morning is not really enough to get you through the week. It's not that I don't hope and pray that you are completely loaded up, spiritually speaking, here this morning, but you don't know what you're going to face during the week. There may be some situation, some kind of relationship thing. And just suddenly and just find your energy depleted. So what are we supposed to do to get us through to next Sunday, or just through next day even? Do we have to wait to Sunday morning? Well, fortunately for us, we don't, right? Because there are places along the way that we can load up with fuel along the way. And I think of the Apostle Paul, and if anyone has run a grueling race, it would be the Apostle Paul. And where did he fill up along the way? Well, let's find out. Emily's going to come up and read Philippians chapter 4, verse 2 through 7.
I implore you, Euodia, and I implore Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. And I urge you also, true companion, help these women who labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus.
Thank you, Emily. I guess today there's a lot of debate, isn't there, about what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat, both health-wise, right? It seems like 1 minute they say, oh, you can't eat this, it's going to kill you. And then a couple of years later they reverse the whole thing and say, oh, actually it's all fine, in fact you should eat that. And the same thing is true in running circles too. Debate goes around about what's best to eat for races and all that kind of stuff. And we could talk about spiritual life too. What is the best fuel, and how can we tell what we are running on? And I'll read this passage here, and it starts off that Paul is talking about these two women, Euodia and Syntyche, and it seems like they're kind of running on the wrong fuel, doesn't it? Because they are having this disagreement. And when we start running on our own fuel, spiritually speaking, it can lead us into places that are not great, right? Where we find ourselves kind of burning a bit hot, in other words, We're using a fuel that really doesn't help our environment. And it's not just these two women that, where there's disagreement, but then it's kind of spills over into the church as well, which is kind of what Paul is concerned on. And it's also a complete waste of energy, isn't it? This disagreement that these two women are having, it's using a lot of energy. It's funny how we use a lot of energy, don't we, on things that we really shouldn't be expending energy on whatsoever. So what is the alternative? What's the right fuel that they should be using? Well, Paul would say the gospel, right? That is the fuel that we should be using. And it's not that Paul was against these two women, because he wasn't against them at all. He loves these two women. They have been his co-workers. They have labored alongside him for the gospel. They've worked beside him. Their names, he says, are in the book of life. They are fellow believers. He cares for them deeply. Now, we don't know what the disagreement was over. It wasn't doctrinal, because if it had been doctrinal, Paul would have said something about that. He wouldn't have just let that go free. Possibly some kind of personality clash. I don't know. It doesn't say, and I'm not going to conjecture what the disagreement was about. But Paul wants them back, doesn't he? He wants them back on the right fuel. And these women, they're prominent. They must be some kind of leaders in the church, because that's why Paul mentions them by name. I think as we've seen that Paul's overarching concern is the gospel. And he wants us to live in the gospel. Why? Because it's the gospel that gives us peace. It gives us peace. It's how we have peace with God in the first place, right? It's through the gospel of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ, he himself is our peace. We can have peace with God through nobody else other than Jesus Christ. Because he is the one that has reconciled us to God through his body that was hung on a tree. He killed hostility between us and God. Therefore, Christ himself is our peace. And if we place our faith in Jesus Christ and we believe in Jesus Christ, then we have peace with God. But it's not just peace with God, is it, vertically speaking, is it? That peace then spreads out horizontally so that we can have peace with one another. And we have a community, a church, that we are a people of peace, a community of peace. And of course that sounds great, doesn't it? And it's true. And we all nod away and we go, yes, Bryan, that's really good. And we like that. And we're a people of peace until we start running out of fuel. Because I don't know about you, but when I start running out of fuel, I start getting a little cranky. I'm not so peaceful anymore. One time on a race, an experienced runner gave me a very sage bit of advice, and he said, you know, most of the problems that we have running all have to do with fuel or with food. And when we run out or we run on the wrong things, then we get ourselves into problems. So on a shorter race, you know, you can make it the whole race through, particularly without filling up with food. But on a 100-miler, you cannot do that. It doesn't matter how much you carb load the night before. You are not going to make 100 miles on a meal the night before the race. So you better take advantage of the aid stations that they have every 7 miles or so. And that's kind of what Paul is telling us here in this text that we just read, is that we better fuel up along the way. And in particular, he says that there's 3 things that we need to consume often. And firstly, has to do with basic food. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. The beginning of the chapter, Paul wrote, finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same thing to you is no trouble to me and is safe for you. You think Paul ever rejoiced very much? You think he spent much time rejoicing? I think he spent his whole time rejoicing, didn't he? He was constantly rejoicing. So a 100-mile race, if you can't fill up beforehand and carb load, then what is it that you do, right? Because you're probably going to spend 6,000 to 7,000 calories during a race. So the basic thing that most runners use, and I would use, is one of these. And it's called goo. And it's like a liquid or a gel carbohydrate. There's about 110 calories in one of these. And I would eat one of these every hour. That's maybe a bit more if I felt like my energy was sapping a bit. And you can get different flavors. This one's like caramel, and this one's like strawberry banana. It doesn't really matter too much what they are. You just chug it down, and because it's not about the taste, it's about the energy. And I think that Paul's basic food was rejoicing. He was always finding something to rejoice about. And I think, well, what is it that he was able to rejoice about? Because he'd written this letter, right? He hadn't been able to go to church for 4 years. He'd been locked up. He hadn't, and he'd been under house arrest. And yet here he was rejoicing, although he hadn't been able to go to a Sunday morning and carb load spiritually. Rejoicing isn't just about being happy, is it? Sometimes we make that mistake. Well, if I just, buy that new pair of shoes that will help me run faster. That will make me happy. And maybe it does make you happy for a little bit, but after a while, those shoes start to get old, and and then you have to find something else to make you happy. So that isn't what Paul is talking about when he talks about rejoicing. And he's not talking about just when things are going well either, when you happen to be on a nice piece of trail and, oh yeah, this is nice and it's going my way and I'm liking this, right? Paul isn't talking about that either. And he's not talking about false happiness. Because sometimes I think as Christians we think, oh, I need to be happy, right? And we walk around with a plastic smile, like that Barbie at the end of Toy Story 2, goodbye now, goodbye now. No, oh, never mind, I'll talk to myself. And Paul isn't talking about that either, not a false kind of happiness. So what kind of happiness, what is rejoicing, Paul? Where can we find that? Well, for a start, we could think back to when Christ met us on the road, where and when, and that should give us a reason to rejoice, right? Wow. That Jesus would come and find me and bring me into his kingdom? Yes. We can rejoice in the Word. When we start feeling a bit empty, right, and we need to fuel up again, how blessed are we that we have God's Word, in a book or on our phones or wherever it might be, and anywhere we can go, we can just top up again and get ourselves going and read about what God has done and what Jesus has done and rejoice. We can look out at the blue skies and the sunshine and say, yes, thank you, Lord. Yesterday, we went to the zoo and we saw all kinds of different animals over there, and some of them are pretty funky, like those naked mole rat things, But just looking at the variety of all those different animals and thinking about who created them and who they point to, and wow. What a sense of imagination and wonder and rejoice. Because there's no shortage of things when we realize who it's all from and who it all points to that we can't rejoice. Rejoice over my relationships, over this church, over everything, right? If I'm thinking it in the right way. And I know when I need to fuel up, just as I do when I'm running, because there's a runner's term, and it's called boinking, and it's when your energy level drops. And you can just feel it. Suddenly your legs start feeling heavy. Maybe you feel a little bit lightheaded as well. And you know what the problem is. And I know spiritually speaking what the problem is too. And I need to get back to looking at God to rejoice. The prophet Habakkuk, he lived through a kind of difficult time. Things weren't going very well for Judah. And he looked around at the state of the world, and he saw these enemies of Israel and Judah piling in. And he had this conversation with God about, what is all this? How could you allow this? How could you use these people against us? And it went back and forth, and at the end of the conversation, it really didn't really help Habakkuk much because God said, no, this is what I'm doing. I'm bringing these people in, and it's going to be bad for Judah and Israel. And this is what Habakkuk said. He said, though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food. The flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Because rejoicing is our basic food. It's what gets us down the trail of life. Secondly, we need an agreeable food. Paul says for the Philippians to let their reasonableness be known. You could translate that as gentleness. So, if a 100-miler takes about 30 hours, which is what about takes me, one of these every hour, that's about 30 goos, right? Yeah. It's not good. But that's only 3,000 calories, right? So it still leaves you halfway short. So you have to eat some other stuff along the way. And these aid stations, they have sandwiches and they have crisps and they have boiled potatoes and fruit and bananas and watermelon. Nighttime they have like soup and noodles. And then the next morning they'll have like breakfast stuff, right? Like pancakes and even some sweets things as well. But here's the problem. So you've been running, for 24 hours and you got all this stuff jiggling up and down inside your stomach. And I'm not going to go into details here. Other than to say, you have to be a little careful what else you put in there as well. Because it doesn't all agree with you. And when it doesn't agree with you, well, it's just bad, right? And I look around in the world around of us, and there's a lot of different fuel that we can use, isn't there? But is it really very agreeable? Is it very compatible with what we're trying to run on? Because it seems like there's just a lot of fuel that's intolerant, a lot of fuel that is irritable, and a lot of fuel is really very disagreeable, frankly. A lot of it is like my way or the highway kind of fuel that really burns hot, doesn't it? Anger. There's so much anger these days. Everybody is angry. And it's so easy to run on that fuel too. Because, when that starts to run out, it's pretty easy to find something else to get angry about, isn't it? You just look on your phone, on social media, or whatever it is, and you can soon be running back on that again. The stuff that I like to particularly eat on those long runs is fruit. I find that probably the most agreeable thing for my stomach. And it's funny because gentleness and reasonableness is a fruit of the Spirit. And it's a fruit of the Spirit because it insists not on getting your own way. It doesn't, it yields, and it's about being kind, and it's about being courteous. It's about being tolerant, even when somebody has the audacity not to agree with you. It's about being courteous, about loving other people. So why doesn't everybody use this kind of fuel? Well, I think you'll only kind of use it if you believe that the Lord is at hand, is what Paul says. Because if you don't think the Lord is at hand, and you think that all there is to be had is in this world and in this time frame, then you're probably not going to be gentle and reasonable, are you? Because this is all you've got, right? So you've got to fight and kick and punch your way to get whatever you can while you can. Because it's kind of that scarcity mentality, isn't it? That this is all there is. Resources and time are limited. But if you, on the other hand, see that the Lord is at hand, and that this isn't all that there is, but we go on for eternity, then we can use a different kind of fuel, a fuel that's much more agreeable. Because at the end of this day, when we come to shuffle off this mortal coil, that's not the end. The Lord gets his way. Not us getting our way. The Lord gets his way, and we are with the Lord. So it's all good. We can afford to be reasonable, and we can afford to be agreeable. Paul, writing to Titus, says, remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, to be gentle, and to show perfect courtesy towards all people. So we can be We can use agreeable fuel anytime we want if we remember that the Lord is at hand. And then thirdly, has to do with comfort food. Paul says, do not be anxious about anything, and he means anything in Greek. Anything means anything. But in everything, and again in Greek, everything means everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Who has a favorite comfort food? Anybody? Like when you just had a hard, long day and you come home and you go to the fridge or the cupboard, and what is it that you get out, right, that's going to make you feel a little bit better? Well, we don't know. Mac and cheese. Oh, right, okay. Each to their own. I know after a long, hot run, the thing I really like is strawberry milk. I love strawberry milk. I could drink gallons of it. But Paul says that prayer is our comfort food. I guess he could have said that it was our basic food as well. I suppose the two might be interchangeable. But how is prayer our comfort food? Does prayer make our anxieties vanish just like that? Does it wipe out everything that we are anxious about? No, it doesn't do that, does it? The problems that we are anxious about are still there. The situation that we're anxious about is still there. It doesn't eradicate all that. We still have to face it. But it does mean we don't have to be anxious about it. So why don't we have to be anxious about it? Because of who we are praying to, right? That we are praying to God, the creator of everything, sovereign ruler of everything, the one who loves us so much that he was willing to die on a cross for us and give his life for us, that he wants to give his absolute best towards us. There's absolutely nothing that he can't do. That's why we can afford not to be anxious. We can tell him our requests, and we can go about our business, knowing that we've placed our requests, we've placed our anxiety in his hands, and we have nothing else to fear. And Paul also says that we should pray with thanksgiving, that God delights to hear our prayer, that we can even come into the very presence of God in the first place should give us incredible thanksgiving in our hearts, right? Wow, I can't believe that the God of the universe wants me to come before his throne and tell him what is on my mind, what I'm fretting about, what I'm worried about, that he absolutely delights to hear that. And he wants to answer me too. He doesn't want to just blow me off and ignore me, but he actually wants to answer me. And it's not because God is just going to hand it out, right, what we've requested. But that's where we run into trouble, isn't it? Because very often, rather than praying and giving our requests to God and leaving it in God's hands and saying to God, I believe you and I trust in you and I want you to do your very best for me. Well, I'm just confessing what I do sometimes. Here, God, this is what I want you to do, right? And then as I look around, I start to get anxious again because I get this feeling in the back of my mind that maybe God isn't actually going to do what I want him to do. That he has a different plan and a different outcome from the outcome that I want. Because the thing is, I haven't really been praying and just leaving it in God's hands. I've been praying for a specific outcome. Now, I think we can pray for outcomes too, but again, we need to leave it in God's hands. Because maybe his best isn't the outcome that I want. Or the way that he wants to do it isn't the way that he wants to do it. Or maybe you're guilty of this too, and you make your request to God, and you leave it in his hands, right? And then you go your way, but you've kind of put this time frame on it, right? And a few days later, you kind of notice that nothing's kind of happened, and so you go, you know, and you go back to God and say, well, maybe if you're not going to do something with it, I'll take it back and I'll go and do something with it myself. And of course, we take our anxiety back with us too, don't we? Even after we've placed it in God, if we just don't walk away and snatch it back again, then we're bringing back the anxiety again too. And when we do that, we don't end up with peace. Before a race, I would review the course, and I'd go over the course in my mind, and I would pray about it too, right? And kind of think about the difficult sections and lay that before the Lord's feet, and that's all good, right? And maybe that's what we're doing here this morning. And then you actually start out on the race. And you get to maybe one of those difficult sections, and it's not going the way that you thought it would go. And then what? We have to wait till next Sunday to pray, or before we can get alone, for an hour, in the morning to do that. No, we don't. That's the beauty of prayer, isn't it? It is that we don't have to be in a specific place. We don't have to be at a specific time. We can just shoot up a quick prayer to God and give him our anxieties again. Towards the end of 100 miler, the last 15 miles or so, your stomach can't take any more of this stuff. It can't take any more fruit. It can't take anything particularly. And so you're just looking for something to get you across the finish line. Caffeine and sugar works great. Coke and gummy bears. That's what you run on. Coke and gummy bears. And I think of gummy bears like a prayer, right? No? Gummy bear prayer. You just shoot it up to get you across, to get rid of your anxiety, to keep you going. One of my favorite people in the Bible is Hannah. And Hannah, she had this difficult problem because she didn't have any kids. And it was really important back then for a woman to have kids, right? Her whole status relied on the fact of her being a mother. And to make matters worse for Hannah, her husband had another wife, and she had several kids, and she let Hannah know about it all the time. So that just rubbed salt into the wound. And so Hannah went to Shiloh one time, and that's where the ark and the tabernacle was, and she was praying there. And Eli, the priest, was there, and he saw Hannah praying, and she was praying so fervently in the Spirit that he thought she was drunk. Because apparently back then, things weren't going so well when people went to pray, that he would think that she was drunk. But Hannah says this. She says, "Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I've been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation." And then Eli answered and said, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." And she said, "Let your servant find favor in your eyes." Then the woman went her way, and she went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. God hadn't granted her request, but she left her request and her anxiety there at the altar because she understood who God is. And we can do the same here this morning. And you can do that throughout the week too. Even when you feel that anxiety coming back on you, you can offer up your gummy bear prayer and know that God has it under control. If we use the right fuel, it will transform our lives. And we will experience the peace of God, the supernatural peace of God, despite everything else that might be going on around us in our world, in our lives, we can experience that peace that is beyond our comprehension. So to close now, let's just close our eyes. I just want to close your eyes right now. And just breathe deeply. And picture in your mind the Lord of the universe. He's sitting on his throne right now. And he's sovereign over all things. There's not one thing that is going on in this world right now that the God of the universe has any anxiety over at all. He's not sitting there going, oh, I didn't think of that, or I didn't see that coming. And he knows you.